Hello and welcome to the Mysticast, where you join Jack Stafford and Deborah Littleboy, members of the Aetherius Society, the cosmic religion for the Aquarian Age, as we break down the barriers between religion, science, metaphysics, philosophy, and mysticism, all of which are really only aspects of the self-same quest for truth. Please note, this is an independent program, not produced or fact-checked by the Aetherius Society. Today, our guest is Phill Webster. Hey Phill, how you doing?
Hey, thank you for having me on.
It's our pleasure. So we were attracted by your book, Letting Glow.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. It's been out a few months now and slowly gaining some traction, but yeah.
So what we want to talk about is your journey, basically. So how you got to where you are, what you're doing to stay there, to develop, and where you're going.
Sure. Yeah. Where should we start? Did you get
The beginning?
Have a look at the book? Right. Yeah. So for me, I this is kind of a new venture for me. I feel like I keep saying I'm right at the start of my journey. Sometimes people correct me and say that I'm being too I don't know,
Modest.
not giving myself enough credit or something like that. But it's only been a few years. I think it's sort of getting close to the 3-year mark that I've really dove into sort of research and spiritual practices and then really essentially concentrating on mediumship, which is the sort of direction that I'm going. But yeah, I didn't really grow up with any kind of religious upbringing at all. And excuse me, my computer is being weird. And yeah, sort of lived a pretty conventional life. And I suppose like through my youth, I was somewhat interested in I don't know, sort of spooky stuff like we get into when we're kids, things like that. I felt that a few things had happened. I'm talking sort of what could be called paranormal experiences when I was a kid, but as I got older, I kind of just dismissed them. I thought, well, sort of outgrew it and thought, well, did those things really happen, or was it, probably just imagination, right? But then I suppose a couple of more profound things happened. Every few years, it would seem something would come up, and again, it wouldn't sort of sit in my memory in the same way as normal things. And something would happen, and I'd be okay. Well, that's interesting, or like I said, a couple of bigger experiences. But I was sort of quick to just sort of put them behind me and move forward more practically. Getting on with work, relationships, bills to pay, all the rest of it. So I didn't really think that these things had any sort of service to me. Until very recently when my mum passed at the start of 2021. Something happened around her passing that was kind of, it was really the call to action, I think, and really the spur to write the book. Yeah, and just sort of was like, okay, I need to stop ignoring these things.
And what was that?
All right. So the book starts with this story. So I'll just go through it step by step. So essentially, we'd been through 2020, various lockdowns, all the rest of it. My mum was 76 years old, various age-related health problems. But, I thought she'd be around for a while. She would always bounce back from whatever it was. She had high blood pressure, a heart condition, but she kept sort of trudging on. Obviously she lived alone. So she was on the Isle of Wight, which is an island at the south of the UK, just in case anyone doesn't know that. It's a very rural place. And there's kind of a point to me going all around telling you about this. But yeah, so she'd essentially been self-isolating for the whole of 2020. And then we got into January 2021. We just had this Christmas where the government had told us that we were all, allowed to go see each other for Christmas and all that stuff. We made plans. And then they did kind of a U-turn on that, and we ended up canceling those plans. So I hadn't seen her for a couple of months. Also, I was waiting to start work on a big movie. I was working sporadically as an actor. I use the word very loosely. But I've got a good 4 months on one of these big Marvel superhero movies, right? So I was a little bit cautious myself about traveling around on public transport, not catching COVID myself, as well as thinking of my mum's safety. So, okay, to get to the point, I hadn't seen her for a few months. And we would FaceTime every day. So on this particular night in January, it was quite late at night. Maybe 9:30, 10. And I think it was the third conversation we'd had that day. And just to sort of reiterate, I knew all the neighbors. We were in another lockdown and we didn't have any family there. And when she answered the call, as she leaned into the screen, there was a man leaning in from the other side. And it kind of threw me off, right? And I was like, okay, well, who's that? And I saw him long enough that I could describe him. He was maybe mid-60s, thinning gray hair, quite gaunt looking, glasses. And it just threw me off. And I said, well, who's that? And my mum said, who's what? So I was, okay, I just saw someone, and I kind of grilled her on it for a couple of minutes. And I said, Mum, and she sort of just dismissed me and started telling me about her day. And I said, look, I'm sorry to interrupt, but who was the guy? I just saw someone. And she was like, no, there's not been anyone here for, hours. She would have help with our meds and stuff. Some nurses would come around midday, but I never saw them there any later than sort of like 6 p.m. in the evening. And she kept talking, and we ended up talking for about 45 minutes. And I could normally tell if there was someone with her, like it was something that used to drive me nuts when I was a kid. She would always change her whole demeanor. She would speak more posh. She would sort of put on these airs and graces, and it was impossible to have a conversation with her, and she wasn't doing any of these things. So we spoke for nearly an hour, and I thought, all right, well, I must have been mistaken. I don't know what that was, but again, it was just one of these things that just didn't logically make sense to me. She didn't acknowledge anyone, anything like that. And then I went to bed, and then the next morning I got a call from one of the neighbors that they couldn't get in because she was having a heart attack, and by the time the emergency services got there, she passed. So through all of the initial grief and all of those things that we go through when we lose someone close, this memory just kept sitting at the back of my mind, kind of gnawing away, like, okay, well, who was that? And I told various friends about it, and I was getting mixed responses. A lot of people were like, okay, well, you can't be sure that there was no one there. And I was like, okay, well, 100, I can't say for 100% that there was absolutely no one was there. I wasn't there, but knowing all of the variables, knowing my mum, I believe that there was nobody physically with her. Other people were saying, well, it's grief. And I was like, well, it wasn't grief because it was before the fact, and then of course there were people that were suggesting that it was, a sign of some sort, and talking about spirit guides and all that kind of thing, which wasn't an area which I was really well versed in. And yeah, like I say, it just kind of kept ticking away at the back of my head until I eventually decided to sort of dive into it and be like, okay, well, let's see, is this a real thing?
And so what, you did practices, or you spoke to mediums, or?
Well, yeah. So that kind of really, I started work on this film. And there's a point actually why I'll tell you the name of this film, not just kind of name dropping or anything, but I was on one of these big Marvel movies, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, it was called. So it was a sequel to this film called Doctor Strange, one of these big superhero Disney things. And I had about 4 months on it. And for the first two, and I started work immediately the next day. And there was a long delay until my mum's funeral because of COVID, all that stuff. She was on the Isle of Wight. So there was a big backlog, to put it kind of bluntly, of deaths. Anyway, so the first couple of months on this film, I didn't really speak to anyone. I just kind of had my head down. I started looking at books that had helped me in the past, sort of nothing really too deep. I was looking at just some sort of general popular, I suppose, new age books that I read, like Neil Donald Walsh, things like this. Just to say, and it helps. I have to say it helps. And then at some point, I told a young lady this story on the film set about 2 months in, when I eventually started talking to people. And she said, well, have you asked for a sign? And I, it'd been something I've been thinking about, but I was almost afraid to. I was thinking, okay, well, what if I ask for a sign and nothing happens? Then it sort of, what does that mean again? Because this person that I've seen, he didn't look like any family members, anything like that. And it although it was just a very odd thing, but it didn't really give me any comfort at the time that I'd seen this man the night before she passed. It didn't really sort of make any sense still. Although the logical, if I can call it logical explanation, seemed to be that, all right, this was somebody letting me know that she was about to pass. So I had a day off from filming. Myself and my partner, we were moving into a new flat, and the place was a mess. And I had a box of Blu-rays, the kind of obsolete now, obviously, with streaming services. But anyway, I was methodically putting them away. And she was at work. My partner was at work. And while I was doing this, I thought of this girl's words, and I thought, all right, let's do this. And I said, okay, Mum, if you're around, can you give me a sign? And then I went back to putting these things away. And as I put them away, I'd got all these movies from these series, these Marvel superhero things. And I noticed that one was missing, and the one that was missing was Doctor Strange. So the original movie to the sequel that I was working on every day, you know. And I thought, well, okay, that's odd. And I didn't really attribute it to me asking for a sign. I was just kind of annoyed that it wasn't there because they were all in one box, and that one was missing. But I thought it was kind of odd that out of all of them, that was the one that was missing, you know, that I was working on this film pretty much 4 or 5 days a week. And anyway, I kind of went about tidying the rest of the flat. And later on in the day, like a good hour later, I came across this Blu-ray, and it was sitting on top of a pile of books, completely the other side of it. Was a studio flat. And I thought, well, it shouldn't be there. But anyway, so I looked at this Doctor Strange movie, and underneath the corner of the book below it was poking out, just revealing the author's name, which was Maureen, which was my mum's name. And then the book underneath that one, part of the title was poking out, and it said Living. So I'd got Doctor Strange, Maureen, Living, an hour or so after I'd asked for a sign. And I thought, okay, I don't know, you know, like the immediate skeptic jumps in, you know. But at the same time, I thought, all right, well, could be, I'm on the fence with this 50-50, but that, you know, that kind of piqued my interest. And then just to get back to, you know, your original question, really, I started reading a book on mediumship by a lady called Claire Broad. And another interesting thing about this was I didn't know where Claire was from. And forgive me, it was an audiobook, so I was listening to it. I didn't do any research on her. Just the title of the book caught my attention. I think it's called What the Dead Are Trying to Teach Us. Quite a catchy title. And the first page of the book, it opened across the road from where I was living. So Claire could have been from anywhere. She could have been from America. She could have been from Australia or anywhere. But the first page took place across my street. Like I could look out the window and see the cemetery that she described, that she was talking about. And again, I was like, well, what a coincidence, you know. But like in hindsight, looking back at all these funny things. And then very shortly, Claire was running a course at a place called the College of Psychic Studies in Kensington in London, and I joined that, and we very quickly became fast friends. But yeah, just around the same time and like I say, Claire's a medium. I wandered past a spiritualist church, which was quite close to where I live, and I'd walked up and down that street maybe 30 times since moving to this new area, and I saw that they had a demonstration of mediumship every Sunday, which was kind of self-explanatory. So I went along, and I was, again, sort of very skeptical. For some reason, I turned all of my social media stuff to private. I don't know why, that I thought somebody would preempt my visit there, you know, like I didn't tell anyone about it. But I went along, and this lady working, she was a medium called Janet Neville, and she started getting affirmation after affirmation from all the people she talked to, you know. And I would say, you know, as she went around, she was like on a 90% success rate here. And it was the first time I'd seen anything like this. And by the time she got to me, and it wasn't guaranteed that she was going to come to me, I was hoping that she would, of course, and hoping to hear from my mum. She started talking about a young man that had passed away, you know, and I thought, okay, I've no idea what she's talking about. And she was insisting that I knew who this person was. And I just wasn't getting any of it. I was thinking of another friend that had passed. And anyway, sort of, she'd gone through it all. But some of the things that she talked about was that I was exploring mediumship, that I'd been connected to what she called spirit my whole life, and that I would someday become a medium. And I was like, well, all interesting, you know, considering I'd just sort of opened up to learning about this stuff. But it wasn't something that I thought that I was going to go any further with. And anyway, she talked about this guy a lot, and then suddenly the penny dropped, and I was like, okay, I know exactly who she's talking about. Everything she said suddenly made sense. She talked about when we'd gone to college together, and I remember there was a friend of mine that had passed away when he was 20. It fell in with the wrong crowd, there were drugs involved, all that kind of thing. And I was like, okay, now it makes perfect sense. She's talking about him. And just before she finished, she said, okay, I've got a lady with me that's recently passed. Described my mum physically, described her age. And the game changer for me was really, and I didn't know anything about mediumship past the rudimentary little that I'd learned about it. But Janet's accent changed. So she had a very Cockney London accent. And all of a sudden she started speaking with a Midlands accent, just like my mum's accent, who was from Derby. And she just started talking about, you know, that she'd passed and that it was wonderful, and the way she put it, and just used my mum's words. And it just, you know, kind of choked me up immediately. And as far as I was convinced, you know, it was a thing. It was a real thing. And I went away that night feeling everything had changed. You know, it was very brief, but to me, it was undeniable. And like I say, the deciding factor for this was, of course, you know, I went there wanting to have this experience. Was the accent change, you know, and I was like, well, there's no way. I don't have any trace of a northern accent or anything like that. Yeah, and it just blew me away, you know, and that all around that long-winded story was the catalyst sort of set me on this path.
Okay, so where you want to go? You want to be a medium?
I'm not sure. I don't particularly. I'm not really striving to be one. I've very much slacked off lately with my commitments in terms of sitting in a circle and developing. I do practice meditation as regularly as I you know, sort of try to keep it up. But yeah, I don't feel like it's my end goal. I find it fascinating and learning about it and the little that I've learned, and when I've practiced it and gave messages to other people. And again, just stressing that I feel like I'm very much at the start of my journey. I've told people things that I know is not from me, you know. I've had confirmations about the most off the wall things. For example, I remember sitting in a circle and a lady there that I'd never met before. And, you know, as we practice as a medium, we sort of ask our guides to come in and then relay something from somebody that's passed to the person that we're sitting with. And I remember one night I was just getting a baby orangutan. Like, it's just such a random image to have in my head. And I was like, hey, give me something. I got a baby orangutan. And I was like, all right, I'm not going to say that, right? And I sort of try to clear it. Please just, you know, can we try this again? Baby orangutan, over and over. And I was like, okay, well, I said, forgive me. I said, but does a baby orangutan mean anything to you? You know? And she was like, yeah, of course, yeah. That my daughter works in an orangutan sanctuary in California. And I was, you know, this lady was from London. I didn't have any notion that she had anything to do with the States. I'd also been talking about an elderly gentleman that came through who she confirmed as her father. So she took that as her dad was letting her know that he was keeping an eye on her daughter. So that was just like, for me, again, I'm like, I wouldn't have just pulled that out of nowhere, you know. It's been fascinating, and yeah, but I feel that I'm still very much at the start of my journey.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I've got this book here to hand.
All right.
By the president of our organization.
Okay.
How to Unlock Your Psychic Powers by Richard Lawrence in Fulham. He's
right. Yeah.
He's been in the society for 50 years now, and he developed mediumship. He does so our master, he did well, Deborah can explain it better than me. I should bring Deborah in at this point.
Well, thank you for the story, Phill. And
Forgive me,
before I do as Jack has told me to, I just want to share something back with you.
Yeah.
That I'm not a medium at all, but I do get messages through from what I call my higher self, Big Dev. Like, I get things I have to do. And maybe 7 years ago, I woke up at 3 a.m. and I was told to go and put television on and watch it. Well, I don't even watch television. But down the stairs I went, grumpy, because I am quite grumpy anyway, turned on the television and I'm watching. So why am I here then? What am I watching? What am I trying to be looking at? And then this thing came on that meant something to me. So I was watching that and I was so fascinated and it was evolving and unfold, you know, in front of my eyes, and I won't go through that bit. But then when that had finished, I went, well, what next? And across the bottom of the screen come UKIP next. Now, as in, yeah, but see, I'm a Londoner. My dad would always go, get some kip, right? So I'm going to work, and so what now? UKIP next. So, right, thanks very much for that. went off to bed. It's a bit like your Maureen is. It's the same sort of. But for me, I'm not trying to be rude to you, but for me,
No.
I have to have it like, Deborah, it's that word there.
Yeah.
That one there, you know, and then like Big Deb shows me in ways that I would know. So all I'm saying, I'm endorsing really that that's the way that spirit gets through the cracks in the holes to make me pay attention. And I just wanted to sort of show that parallel. But the interesting thing that, going back to Jack's, let me explain the levels of mediumship, which I'm not qualified to do at all, but here we go. As I understand it, there is the Deborah level, which is like, I'll ask questions, I will get answers if I keep my ears open and then go, that's not good enough, ask and ask again. So that's the base, that's the basic. And then we get bringing in spirit guides, people from other realms, because we've got there's different realms within Earth. So depending on where you deserve to go for your next lesson in Earth, you go to that realm. And then we bring through these people as they've passed and gone to other realms. So we're proving to our people on this realm that actually life is continuous. And there's very much that's really helpful, because then people aren't fearful of dying. Because to die when you're in fear, it's not a healthy thing to do. It's not a healthy way to die if you're in fear. You need to make it nice and smooth and easy, and then you go to the best possible place for you then to continue. So that's really really, really valid. But
that's
then
important to mention. Yeah, the other realms are right here, you know, at just a different frequency of vibration, a different part of the electromagnetic spectrum. You know, we could be a castle here, or a mountain, or an ocean, but it's the hells and the heavens are right here, but just at a different frequency.
Was that your understanding from when you're sitting in a circle? Is that what your understanding too, Phill? That
I'm very, again, I probably, forgive me, I'll probably mention this a lot. I just kind of, I think that there seems to be a somewhat of a, depending on who you speak to around, well, let's just call it around spiritualism, as I've understood it. You know, there's a long history in this country, and I'm always very cautious about stepping on toes that I'm just stepping in like this guy. I've been doing this 2 or 3 years, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a medium. I don't want to upset anyone with that, so I'm always very you know, tentative about you know, sort of saying what I think is the way that it works. But yeah, from what I understand, that I've had other experiences in the past, and I guess we'll get to it. But yeah, like you say, I believe that there are multiple layers of reality happening at the same time. I'm definitely not smart enough to
multiverse.
Yeah, I feel that some of what I've wrote as actually, and again, we'll probably get to it, has been channeled. When I look at it, I'm like, okay, well, that I didn't write that. You know, that I'm not smart enough to understand that. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, I believe that we're existing on multiple levels of all sorts at the same time, which is just mind blowing when you go into it.
There's a good movie, and Astral City. You should check that out. It's a Brazilian movie. But you mentioned the Church of Spiritualism. It's the biggest religion in Brazil, and one of their most famous people wrote a book, and they made a movie about it, and that's really gives you a good impression of the other realms. And it's really just, you know, there are cars, there are houses, there are streets, there's computers, It's like that. It's not like the spirit world where you just like float. We're all on clouds, you know. Bubble shaped.
Yeah. But sorry.
So going back to the stepping up, I'll try and make it as quick as possible. But we are told that you can only bring in somebody that's on the next level up, or the one after that. If they're too far up, then you can't get the messages through, because there's a neurons in the links in your brain that it won't work. So you're not going to get the message through. And if somebody on a higher frequency try to push their information through, fry your brain. That's Deborah's words of it. But you can't take a higher frequency than you're able to reach up as high to bring down. So Dr. King was a master of yoga, practiced 8 to 10 hours a day, for 10 years to become a master of yoga, could master bringing the energies right up to Brahma chakra and bring them back down again, which means that he could channel the very highest entities beyond even Earth. So he was bringing in information from people from the other planets, from cosmic masters. And the channeling that he used was somatic trance, which is a positive trance state, where he actually brought the energies right up to the higher centers. I think it was because he was actually talking. I think he must have brought it up to the heart chakra, which meant that that he was in a state where he couldn't remember, because he bypassed the mind, if you want. So he was just taking pure what was ever put through to him through his voice box was what we were getting verbatim. So these cosmic teachings for the new world are not Dr. King, although he's given us his own teachings. They are verbatim from higher entities. Yeah. And that's not the basic mediumship, because
like a positive trance mediumship. Yeah. When they do negative trance mediumship, you see these mediums, they kind of give up, they take their hands off the wheel, they just sit there and let whoever wants to come in and talk through them, and that's a negative. You can get some lower astral entities come up through you then, and it's not such a good idea.
No, they can be meddlesome and give wrong information just to confuse everybody. But so what we're saying is that our teachings are basically a route out of here. It shows us how our lives go on, how things actually work, and how we're going to progress. And that's what the belief of the Aetherius Society is. But it's about actually working out how to use this robot that we call our body. And that comes from practicing to see how it works. So breathing exercises, mantra to bring you back into the vibration that you should be, closing down the lower mind to bring in the higher frequencies. And I think probably that was what I was most interested with you, because as you say, you're at the beginning of your journey. You've come from a very materialistic, commercial, base, without being rude, but a very basic an entertainment industry, which is fab. But you've come from that, and you've been steeped in that, and now you're taken to this other calling. And I'm thinking that there has to be, because there always is, the reason you've done that. Nothing's by mistake, Phill. So you've come from that grounding. You've got that foundation. Now you're taking all that knowledge, which not many people have, into a completely different realm of experience. So I said to Jack before you came on, I really wonder where Phill thinks he believes he's going with this. So we've got these integrating styles. What's the next step? Have you thought about how you're going to help people with this skill that you're developing?
Yeah, thank you. I must admit, lately, all around and this isn't by any means, I hope my publishers don't get upset with me saying this, but around all of the, promoting the book, talking on various podcasts, sort of like push, all of a sudden everything's turned into sales and stuff like that, which wasn't something that was on my mind at all when I wrote the book. I wasn't even considering what I was actually going to, I wasn't sure what I was going to do with the book. I just kind of, I was in a very mixed state of emotion, obviously pouring my grief into the book. And then these amazing things were happening. I was learning about these amazing things that really resonated with me, and then just pouring all that into the book also. So it was like a very 50-50 sort of experience. actually writing it, and then just sort of putting it out there. I wrote another book straight after it, actually, which goes a lot deeper than sort of my story. But yeah, I feel at the moment, I feel like I'm a little bit in limbo, just around the whole excitement, again, having the book out there, and then sort of getting told that I need to push sales, which I'm the worst salesperson in the world, as you might be able to imagine.
Well, you had good reviews on
that's
Amazon. People connected with the book. They said it was
Oh
a
yeah,
great
thank you. Yeah, it's gaining traction slowly. It's gaining traction. That just the whole this side of it wasn't really sort of my concern, and now all of a sudden it has been the last few months, you know. And I feel like it's somewhat taking me away from the actual purpose of the reason why I wrote the book in the first place was, as you say, to hopefully help other people going through something similar, through grief, or who may have experienced a spiritual awakening. You know, another story that I'm sort of keen to tell you about was something that happened a few years ago. But yeah, it can be a very scary time. And yeah, next steps, I'm not sure. I've definitely my interest has moved away from the whole acting thing. That was kind of really something that came about from moving back to the UK a few years ago after being away for a long time. And then just thinking, okay, if I was really honest with myself, what would I love to do? You know, as a kid, I was always obsessed with films, and that just seemed like a logical way to get into it. That being said, as soon as I saw myself on a cinema screen or TV, I was kind of like, okay, now what? Great. You know, it didn't really scratch the itch that I thought it would. You know, it wasn't really about maybe an element of ego involved, but it didn't satiate anything. You know, I thought, okay, well, it's not that. Okay, I've done that now. And since writing this book, I feel definitely moving away from that arena. As you might imagine, there are a lot of egos on set and all that kind of thing in that world. So yeah, I feel that the most sort of recently I've been talking at a few spiritual festivals and things like that. The numbers have been increasing in size somewhat. Going through a couple of meditations with people, and that seems to be connecting with people. The last one that I did, I got some very good feedback from it. It's all a learning experience for me so far. That seems to be the way forward at the moment. I've got an idea of perhaps starting maybe an online group, fortnightly group where like-minded people can get together, can hold each other accountable. Not sort of, I can talk about what I've learned from mediumship, and I think there'll be an element of that, but more just sort of connecting and opening up and talking about these things, and you know, being a sort of haven where we can you know, sort of hold each other accountable to developing as, dare I say, like modern mystics, you know.
Yeah, because I mean, you said you weren't interested in religious groups or movements, but if you think of the society, the Aetherius Society, as a mystery school, you know, throughout history, you had to walk a long way barefoot through the desert to find a mystery school, whereas there's a bus ride away from you in Fulham, and sometimes you have to go around the world to find to come home, and yeah, you learn there to. You've got to develop the practices. You know, your body is a receiving unit, and you have to do mantra and pranayama to purify it.
Yeah.
To raise your consciousness, so that you know, if you want to develop in that area, so that you can be of greater service.
Well, yeah, I definitely hear a lot of similarities in what we talk about. A lady that I spoke to recently on her radio show called Donna Sibo. I had a really incredible experience with her, actually. I just had a friend come visit, sort of from my sort of former life. I was living in Helsinki, running bars and nightclubs, and living a pretty hedonistic lifestyle, not really thinking about anyone else's interests but my own, you know. And this is maybe 15 years or so ago. This friend showed up, and we sort of fell into bad habits a little bit. Went out, had a few drinks and things like that, and then this lady, Donna Sibo, I've never met her before. She was immediately on me as soon as we started talking. She's like, what do you think you've been doing lately? And I was like, okay, I tell you, sorry. And she was just sort of pointing out, she's like, you know, you've got a responsibility to this now. You've wrote this book, you're talking about these things, you know, you're talking the talk, you gotta walk the walk, you know. And just kind of reminded me that, yeah, I'm not sort of, you know, put a book out there and then, okay, that's done. You know, this is an ongoing process. And yeah, I definitely am taking it seriously. I just need to, yeah, find the sort of next direction of where to take it.
many of these mediums you go to see, many of them in rose gardens, you get a certain amount of ability, and then you set up a table at the spiritual fairs and you do it, you repeat that, you read cards or whatever, but they're not developing, they're not doing practices.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's an interesting observation as well. 'Cause since I've been to a couple of those festivals this year, yeah, I think there is an element of that, not wanting to, disrespect anyone that I've met along the way. But yeah, I feel like a lot of things that I've had lately have been channeled, and again, I'll sort of tell you about the origins of that with my personal experience with that soon. And I look back at something I'd wrote recently, and again, it was talking about this responsibility and not resting on your laurels. And that was a funny term. That again, this is what got me, because I've heard that term throughout my life, not resting on your laurels. And I was thinking, without sounding ignorant, I was like, what the hell's a laurel? I
don't
even
sit
know
on
what that
laurels, they
means,
put you
right?
on the
Yeah.
head.
Right. So I actually had to Google the word laurel, and just the description was, resting on your former success, that you hit this a point where you think that, okay, yeah, I'm good, I've done it now, and then don't stop there, and that really resonated with me. I was like, okay, yeah, need to keep
because it's metaphysics, it's not spiritualism is vague and spirit will, but metaphysics is beyond physics. It's learning. It's A plus B, it's 1 + 1 = 4. It's it's a science, so that's important to think about, not think that if you come to it out of the blue and you develop some psychic powers and you think, you touch it with gloved hands, but if it's not like that, if you want people to speak to people in the know.
Yeah.
You can't say on a you can't just say on a podcast, it's 1 and 1 = 4. You just can't say that and then just move on willy-nilly.
Well, that's a lot to go into.
Yeah, I know, but you can't throw away yeah. So Phill, 1 and 1 = 4. Okay, so now you know.
Well,
I'll send you a link afterwards that will let you know a little bit more than that. But,
well, I really get it. I get it, and I'm almost afraid to sort of go down that avenue, because I've wrote about these things, especially in my second book. But then when I try to reel it off the top of my head, I'm like, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Tell us about your other experience, though, then, Phill.
Yeah, sure. So again, sorry, another long-winded story coming up. But this was again, and in hindsight, it's ridiculous that I dismissed this for what it clearly was. So yeah, mid-30s, I was living in Helsinki. I'd kind of traveled around the world a lot, and I was running bars and nightclubs at this time, and sort of talking about that former life where I was, sort of caught up in what I believed was just kind of pursuing fun, or what I perceived as fun at the time. I wasn't a particularly, horrible person. I was just kind of somewhat self-absorbed, and probably, sort of continuing a lifestyle that most people have grown out of by that point. But in my defense, it was the environment, sort of night after night.
Helsinki's a crazy place. But...
Yeah, and it was really, the place that I was working, it was open 7 nights a week. You'd get regular people coming there, regular customers, I should say. And, it started to seem normal that the people are just drinking like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, having after parties on a Wednesday morning, going to sleep at 1 in the afternoon. It was a really ridiculous way to live in hindsight. But yeah, funnily enough, it was normal at the time. Anyway, on one particular night, so funnily enough, I hadn't actually been drinking heavily or anything like that, although that was very much around me a lot. I woke up one morning, and I remember just sort of, I think there'd been people around, and they all went their separate ways or something. I was living alone, I was single, and I just had this thought, and it wasn't a particularly new thought. It was, I'm definitely not the first person to talk about it, but I just kind of had this notion of how we've only got this one moment of now, right? It's like now all the time. And this is a very basic way of describing it, but I kind of thought, well, where did that moment just go, And again, we've had these thoughts. I probably thought of this as a kid. but something this day shifted, like something, it felt as though it physically shifted. All of a sudden, sort of thoughts of the past or you know, what are the thoughts of the future just kind of disintegrated. And all of a sudden it was like now. And, you know, people talk about living, you know, connecting with the moment of now. And it felt like that times 1,000. I can't emphasize like how terrifying it was. Like I felt that wave of terror kind of wash over me, like a fear that I'd never experienced before. And something switched. It was as though I just stepped through a veil. And something just shifted. And like I say, all of a sudden it was just now. And it didn't stop. And it was as though I were external to myself. And I think people talk about this as like a depersonalization experience, but as though I could just sort of see myself over here, not as in you know, astral projection kind of way, but just I had this awareness of these thoughts that I was having, but almost like I was separate from it, you know, like a separate consciousness. Just observing myself freaking out. So my initial thought was, well, I'll go walk this off. And I remember putting my headphones in and going for a walk down by the sea. And I remember the thought, and again, this is very sort of rudimentary, but I remember looking down the road thinking, okay, well, I'll be over there in a minute. And like, where is that? Like, where is that now? Okay, and it was just messing with my head completely. And again, just this overwhelming sense of now. I couldn't sort of think, okay, what am I going to eat for dinner later? Or what did I do last night? Or all of that just seemed, you know, completely pointless. Almost to the point of absurdity, you know, like that I was starting to doubt reality. And I was thinking, okay, well, even having thoughts, did somebody do something? Did somebody spike me or something? What's going on? You know, this was just so overwhelming. And then this just carried on, and I expected, you know, it to be able to sleep it off or something like that. It just didn't stop. I was going to work, trying to explain to my work colleagues what was going on. People were just looking at me with this glaze of, you know, befuddlement, just like, okay, like what the hell is he talking about? And doing my job at a very basic level, being overwhelmed with customers, things like that. And I think the best way that I could describe it was like, I felt like reality was this very slippery bar that I was hanging on to with my fingertips. You know, I was just about functioning, but at any moment I felt that I was just gonna just completely crack. I went to a doctor and tried to explain this to them, pretty much how I'd explain it to you. And they said, yeah, well, that sounds like psychosis, which terrified me. And, you know, I never thought that was going to be on my horizon. And they gave me a bunch of pills. They gave me some anti-anxiety meds. They gave me sleeping pills. The sleeping pills would knock me out, but then I would wake up and this whole thing would just start over again immediately. I was sleeping with the TV on. I was kind of watching old reruns of shows that I knew the outcome to, just as some
sounds like Eckhart Tolle, the nightmare version.
Right, right. And people mention him, and I still haven't read his books, I should say. And a few weeks later, I went to another doctor. I was like, okay, I truly feel like I'm going out of my mind. And it started getting to a point, maybe around a month mark or something like that. I'm not sure that I thought, okay, and I don't mean to take this down a dark path, but I was starting to think, well, if this is the way that my brain's working now, I'm out of here. I'm not doing this. This doesn't work. You know, this is like a living nightmare. And nobody knew what I was talking about. The second doctor was like, okay, yeah, psychosis, you know, albeit mild psychosis because you're holding down a job, relationships, stuff like that. And it just was getting to a point where I thought I was done. I eventually found a therapist, and what attracted me to this therapist was I saw he was a hypnotist. So my reasoning was that I'll just go along, just make this go away, just hypnotize this thing away, whatever's going on, right? Just get me back to the herd and let me continue. And
take the red pill or the green pill.
Yeah, you know, and he pointed out that, okay, I can't do that. He said we need for hypnotism to work, he said we need an anchor point, like a trigger or a trauma or something that I could take you back to, and we'll work through that. And he said, this doesn't sound like you really have one. And he listened to me talk, and then he said, you're not psychotic. He said, you're having an awakening. He said, you're experiencing ultimate reality. And he called me a mystic, which I remember feeling very uncomfortable and almost embarrassed for him at the time. He was finished, and I thought, well, this is just his interpretation in English. You know, I don't know what's he talking about. And I didn't really care. Again, I just wanted to get out of this, whatever was going on. And he started talking about shamanic sickness and things like this, all these terms I'd never heard of before, and you know, things that I've learned about since. And essentially, he just gave me a couple of basic grounding meditations, and they are, in hindsight, they are sort of very basic, but at the time, they were a lifeline, you know. And I started practicing these on a daily basis, and after a few weeks, I had one day where I woke up and it was kind of like a normal day. You know, I felt like, oh, okay, I'm back online or offline, depending on how you look at it. And, you know, a couple of weeks later, I would have 2 good days. A few weeks later, 3 good days. And very gradually, over the course of a year, I kind of came back to where I wanted to be. A lot more humble. I felt like my ego had been smashed to pieces. You know, I would never dismiss a mental illness ever again, through, you know, but at the same time, a different perspective on it. And again, once I got through it, I just put it behind me. I didn't really attribute this to what I'm, you know, going through now. But again, in hindsight, it seems like all these steps were, yeah, you know, every few years, it was like something would be tapping me on the shoulder. And that was a particularly profound one, if not the most profound one, along with, you know, losing my mum.
Well, I think it sounds like we need to come back when you're doing the next book, and we need to go through the.
Thanks. I need to read it again. Yeah, I feel like it's again. I feel like it's smarter than I am. So
yeah, but get on the bus down to Fulham. Speak to Richard. He's got some amazing. He's channeled Dostoevsky, Madame Blavatsky.
Yeah,
there's clairaudience, clairvoyance. He has a lot of clairaudience, and he knows how to develop. He's been doing these practices for 50 years, so he's a very approachable guy.
We've got a course running for the first time in about 4 years in October.
Coincidence?
I picked that, Phill, and along with 1 and 1 equals 4, which is, I'll send you the link. But
yeah, sure. Yeah. Thank you. I'd be interested to.
Pleasure. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, no, thank you for having me. So forgive me for the long-winded stories. Like there were really 2, you know, a lot going on there. But
and so people can read the book. How can people get hold of the book? How's best to keep track following you?
Yeah, so it's available everywhere. Obviously, I suppose Amazon is the main sort of you know, stopping point for most people, but it can be ordered at any bookshop worldwide. And yeah, I'm most reachable on Instagram. Dabbling with TikTok, don't really understand that so much. And then I've got a website, phillwebster.com, and that's Phill with 2 L's.
Okay, great. If people want to hear about the Aetherius Society, they can go to aetherius.org.
Real.
All right. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.